In the heart of ancient Africa, where the red earth meets the endless sky, there lived a young woman named Amara whose beauty was matched only by her courage. She belonged to the village of Kimani, nestled between rolling hills covered in acacia trees and a mysterious forest that elders warned should never be entered after sunset. But Kimani was dying. For 7 moons, no rain had fallen. The once fertile fields had turned to dust, cattle wandered searching for the last blades of dried grass, and children cried from hunger that their mothers could not satisfy. The village well, which had provided sweet water for generations, now yielded only bitter, undrinkable liquid that made people sick. The village chief, Baba Jengo, was a wise man whose hair had turned white from years of making difficult decisions. He gathered the people under the great meeting tree, its branches providing the only shade for miles around. "My people," his voice carried across the silent crowd, "the spirits are angry with us. We have broken some ancient law, and now we face their wrath." An old woman named Mama Kisi, bent with age but sharp with wisdom, stepped forward. Her walking stick tapped against the hard earth as she spoke. "Chief, there is something you must know. Something the elders have kept secret for too long." The crowd leaned forward, hungry for answers. Beyond the forbidden forest stands the ancient Baobab of whispers. Legend says it holds the power to break any curse, but... She paused, her weathered face grave with concern. No one who has sought it out has ever returned. Young Amara, who had been listening from the back of the crowd, felt her heart race. She thought of her little brother Kito, barely 5 years old, growing thinner each day. She thought of her mother, who gave her own food to the children. She thought of the babies who cried through the night while their mothers had no milk to give. "I will go," Amara announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. The chief shook his head immediately. "Child, you do not understand. The forest is protected by ancient magic. Spirits guard every path, and they do not welcome visitors." But Amara's mind was made up. That night, as the village slept fitfully under the unforgiving stars, she prepared for her journey. She packed dried meat that her family could not afford to lose, a calabash for water, and most importantly, the silver amulet her grandmother had given her, a piece passed down through 7 generations of women in her family. As dawn painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Amara stood at the edge of the forbidden forest. The trees seemed to whisper warnings, their leaves rustling despite the absence of wind. But she thought of her village dying behind her and stepped forward into the green shadows. The forest was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Ancient trees towered overhead, their canopy so thick that only scattered beams of sunlight reached the forest floor. Strange flowers bloomed in impossible colors, deep purples that seemed to glow, blues that shifted like water, and reds so bright they hurt to look at directly. But it was not the beauty that made Amara's skin prickle with fear. It was the silence. No birds sang, no insects buzzed, no small animals rustled through the undergrowth. The only sound was her own breathing and the soft thud of her feet on the moss-covered ground. She had been walking for perhaps 2 hours when she heard it, a low, melodious humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The sound was beautiful but somehow wrong, like a lullaby sung by someone with too many voices. Following a path marked by stones carved with symbols she did not recognize, Amara came to a clearing where a stream bubbled over smooth rocks. The water was crystal clear and looked deliciously cool. Her calabash was already half empty, and her throat burned with thirst. As she knelt by the stream and cupped the water in her hands, a voice spoke behind her. "Drink, and you will never thirst again. But you will also never leave this forest." Amara spun around to find a woman standing at the edge of the clearing. She was tall and elegant, wearing robes that seemed to be made of shadow and starlight. Her skin was dark as the richest earth, and her eyes held the depth of centuries. "Who are you?" Amara asked, her hand instinctively moving to her grandmother's amulet. The woman smiled, revealing teeth like pearls. "I am Nyota, guardian of the first threshold. All who seek the Whispering Baobab must pass through me first. Then you know why I'm here." "I know many things, young Amara. I know your village suffers. I know you have courage that burns brighter than fear. But I also know that the path ahead holds trials that will test more than your bravery." Nyota gestured to the stream. "This is the water of forgetting. One sip, and all your worries will vanish. You can live here in peace while your people face whatever fate awaits them. Amara looked at the tempting water, then back at the guardian. What happens if I refuse? Then you continue on the path. But know this, of the last 100 who made this choice, only 3 reached the second threshold. And none have returned from the Baobab itself. Without hesitation, Amara stood and stepped away from the stream. My people are counting on me. I will not abandon them for comfort. Nyota's smile grew wider and somehow warmer. Wisdom beyond your years. Very well, child. But first, answer me this riddle. I am never made, but always born. I am never kept, but always shared. I am never lost, but always found. What am I? Amara thought carefully. The guardian waited patiently as birds, the first Amara had heard since entering the forest, began to sing in the trees above. Hope, Amara said finally. The answer is hope. Nyota clapped her hands together, and the sound rang like silver bells. Correct. Hope is indeed what drives you, and hope is what you carry to your people. Pass, Amara of Kimani, but remember, the trials ahead will require more than hope. They will require you to discover who you truly are. Beyond the first threshold, the forest changed again. The trees here were even older, their trunks so wide that 20 people holding hands could not encircle them. Vines hung like curtains, and flowers the size of cooking pots released perfumes so strong they made Amara dizzy. But strangest of all were the echoes. Every sound she made, every footstep, every breath, every heartbeat, came back to her changed. Her footsteps echoed as the sound of drums. Her breathing returned as whispered songs. Her heartbeat echoed back as the rhythm of dance. She had been walking for what felt like hours when she realized she was not alone. Shadowy figures moved between the trees, matching her pace but never coming close enough to see clearly. Sometimes she thought she caught glimpses of faces, some human, some animal, some that seemed to be both or neither. The path led her to an enormous tree whose hollow trunk formed a natural archway. Carved into the bark above the opening were words in an ancient script that somehow, impossibly, she could read. To pass beyond, you must face what you fear most. As Amara approached the archway, the world around her began to shift and change. The forest faded, replaced by a scene that made her heart stop with terror. She was back in Kimani, but it was not the Kimani she had left. The village was silent and still. Homes stood empty with doors hanging open. The meeting tree was bare and dead. And scattered throughout the village were the bones of her people, her family, her friends, everyone she had ever loved. You were too late, a voice said behind her. She turned to see herself, another Amara, but one whose eyes held nothing but despair. While you wandered lost in the forest, chasing legends and fairy tales, they all died. Your mother died calling your name. Your little brother died asking when his sister would come home. The vision was so real that Amara fell to her knees, sobbing. The guilt crashed over her like a wave. Had she made the wrong choice? Should she have stayed and suffered with her people rather than chasing after mythical solutions? But then she felt the warm metal of her grandmother's amulet against her chest, and she remembered her grandmother's words. This amulet has been worn by 7 generations of strong women. Each of them faced impossible choices and found the courage to do what was right, not what was easy. Amara stood up, facing the other version of herself. This is not real. This is my fear speaking, not truth. The false Amara hissed like a snake. How do you know? How can you be sure? Because, Amara said firmly, I have hope. And hope does not lie to me the way fear does. The vision shattered like breaking glass, and she was back in the forest. The archway stood open before her, and carved into the bark were new words. Fear faced is fear defeated. Through the archway, Amara found herself in a garden that defied belief. Here, the trees bore fruit of gold and silver. Flowers sang in harmonious chorus, and butterflies with wings like stained glass danced from bloom to bloom. At the center of this paradise sat an ancient man whose skin was marked with intricate tattoos that seemed to move and shift as she watched. Welcome, young seeker, the man said, his voice like the rumble of distant thunder. I am Babu, keeper of memories, guardian of the second threshold. What must I do to pass? Amara asked, though part of her wanted to stay in this beautiful place forever. Babu smiled and gestured to the garden around them. This is the garden of what was. Every tree, every flower, every butterfly holds a memory from your people's past. You may take one memory with you, one perfect moment to treasure forever. But in return, you must give up one memory that brings you pain. He stood and walked to a tree whose golden fruit glowed like tiny suns. Perhaps the memory of your grandmother's last words to you. He touched the fruit, and Amara could see the scene within it, herself as a child, sitting by her grandmother's bedside as the old woman whispered final words of love and wisdom. Then he moved to a tree bearing silver fruit. Or perhaps your father teaching you to hunt, showing you how to track animals and move silently through the bush. Each memory he showed her was precious, irreplaceable. But Amara understood the trap. If I take a memory with me, I'm taking something that belongs to the past instead of fighting for the future. Babu nodded approvingly. And if you give up a painful memory, you give up the lessons that pain taught you. Amara thought of her most painful memory, the day her father died in a hunting accident, leaving her to help support her family. It was agony to remember, but it was also what had taught her to be strong, to be responsible, to put others before herself. I will take no memory, she decided. And I will give up none. My memories, good and painful, make me who I am. Babu clapped his hands in delight. Wisdom. True wisdom. So many seekers try to escape their past or cling to it. You understand that we must carry all of ourselves forward. The garden began to fade around them, but before it disappeared completely, Babu pressed something into Amara's hand, a small seed that pulsed with warm light. For later, he said with a wink. When you need to remember that growth requires both sunshine and storm. Beyond the garden lay a narrow valley where the walls rose high on either side, carved with faces that watched Amara as she passed. These were not human faces, but the faces of spirits, some kind, some stern, some so alien that looking at them too long made her eyes water. At the end of the valley stood a figure that made Amara stop in her tracks. It was herself again, but this version was not born of fear. This Amara glowed with inner light, stood taller, moved with the confidence of someone who had never doubted herself. I am what you could become, this radiant Amara said, if you abandon this foolish quest and stay here with us. Look around you. Do you see any suffering here? Any hunger or thirst or pain? You could have power beyond imagining, wisdom beyond measure, and peace beyond your wildest dreams. The offer was tempting, especially when the glowing Amara gestured to show Amara visions of herself ruling over paradise, beloved by all, never needing to struggle or suffer again. What about my people? Amara asked. What about them? You are not responsible for everyone else's problems. You could send rain to them from here, occasionally, if you wished. But why tie yourself to their suffering when you could transcend it? This version of herself was more persuasive than the fear version had been, because she offered not despair but a different kind of hope, hope without sacrifice, power without responsibility. But Amara thought of little Kito's smile, of her mother's gentle hands, of the way the whole village came together during festivals to share what little they had. She thought of Mama Kisa's stories and Baba Jengo's wise counsel. I am exactly as responsible as I choose to be, Amara said firmly. And I choose to be responsible for my people because they are part of me, and I am part of them. The glowing Amara's beautiful face twisted with anger. Then you choose suffering over joy, struggle over peace, mortality over immortality. I choose love over self-interest, Amara replied. I choose connection over isolation. I choose to be human. The false Amara shrieked and dissolved into golden sparks that swirled around the real Amara before settling into her skin, making her feel stronger and more determined than ever. The valley walls crumbled away, revealing a path that led upward toward a massive tree visible in the distance, a tree so enormous that it seemed to hold up the sky itself. The path to the great tree was the hardest part of Amara's journey, not because of external obstacles, but because of the weight of expectation. With each step, she felt the hopes of her people pressing down on her shoulders. What if she failed? What if the tree could not help? What if she had led her people to false hope? But she kept walking, one foot in front of the other, until she stood before the most magnificent tree she had ever seen. The Whispering Baobab was ancient beyond measure, its trunk wider than her entire village, its branches reaching up so high they disappeared into the clouds. Its bark was silver-white and smooth as river stones, and covering every inch of its surface were symbols that glowed with soft, pulsing light. As Amara approached, the tree began to whisper, not in words, but in voices. She heard the voices of all who had come before her, all who had sought the tree's wisdom and power. Most were voices of failure, of people who had turned back or been found wanting. But scattered among them were voices of triumph, of those who had found what they sought and returned to heal their people. At the base of the tree was a hollow large enough for a person to sit in. Ancient root chairs had grown from the living wood, and on one of them sat a figure that made Amara gasp. It was a woman who looked exactly like her grandmother, but younger, more vibrant, with eyes that held the wisdom of stars. "Hello, my child," the woman said in a voice like wind through leaves. "I am the heart of the baobab, the spirit that dwells within. I have been waiting for you." Are you really my grandmother?" The woman smiled. "I am all grandmothers and none. I am the memory of wisdom passed down, the echo of love shared, the promise of strength inherited. Sit with me, Amara of Kimani, and tell me why you have come." Amara sat in the root chair opposite the spirit and told her story. The drought, the curse, the suffering of her people, her journey through the forest and the trials she had faced. The spirit listened patiently, nodding at key moments, her eyes never leaving Amara's face. When the tale was finished, she spoke. "You have come seeking power to save your people. But power is not what you need." Amara's heart sank. "Then I have failed." "No, child. You have succeeded beyond measure. You came seeking power, but you have found something far more valuable. You have found yourself. You have discovered that you already possess everything you need." The spirit gestured to Amara's neck, where her grandmother's amulet rested. That amulet is not just a family heirloom. It is a key, forged by the first woman of your bloodline who made a pact with the spirits of water and earth. She promised that her descendants would always serve their people, would always put the needs of the community above their own desires. In return, they would have the power to call upon the ancient forces when their people's need was greatest. "But I don't know how to use it." The spirit laughed, a sound like silver bells and running water. "You have already been using it, child. How do you think you survived the trials? How do you think you found the strength to resist temptation? The amulet does not give you power, it amplifies the power you already possess." The baobab began to glow brighter, and the spirit continued, "Your people suffer from a curse, yes, but not one cast by angry spirits. They suffer from the curse of forgetting their connection to the land, forgetting the old ways of calling rain, forgetting that they are part of the great web of life that connects all things." She stood and placed her hands on Amara's shoulders. "You will return to them as a reminder of what they have forgotten. You will teach them the old songs that call rain, the old dances that honor the earth, the old stories that bind communities together. You will help them remember that they are not separate from nature, but part of it." "But what if they don't listen? What if they've forgotten too much?" The spirit smiled and pressed something into Amara's hand. It was the seed that Babu had given her, but now it pulsed with even stronger light. "Plant this in the center of your village. Water it with tears of joy and sorrow alike. Sing to it the songs your grandmother taught you. And watch as it grows into a tree that will provide shade, fruit, and most importantly, a reminder of the connection between your people and the earth." The spirit began to fade, becoming translucent as morning mist. "Remember, Amara, you are not just saving your people from drought. You are saving them from the deeper drought of forgetting who they are." The journey back through the forest was different. The trials were gone, the guardians nowhere to be seen. Instead, Amara found herself walking through scenes of beauty and wonder. Meadows full of flowers that sang in the morning breeze, streams where fish jumped for joy, clearings where deer and rabbits played without fear. The forest itself seemed to be celebrating her success. When she emerged from the forest after what felt like both an eternity and an instant, the sun was setting over Kimani. The village looked even worse than when she had left. More people had grown thin, more cattle had died, and an air of despair hung over everything like smoke from a dying fire. But when the first person spotted her walking across the fields, A cry went up that brought the entire village running. Children who barely had strength to play found energy to run to her. Adults who had barely spoken above whispers began to shout with joy. Amara has returned. Amara has come back to us. But Amara saw in their eyes what she had feared. They expected her to perform some miracle, to wave her hands and make the rains fall, to solve all their problems with magic. Instead, she gathered them all under the meeting tree and told them what she had learned. The power to save ourselves was never lost, she said, holding up the glowing seed. It was only forgotten. We stopped singing the rain songs our grandmothers taught us. We stopped dancing the dances that honor the earth. We stopped telling the stories that remind us we are all connected. Some faces showed disappointment, but Mama Kisi stepped forward with tears in her eyes. The old songs. I remember some of them. My grandmother sang them to me when I was young. Chief Baba Jengo nodded slowly. And I remember the rain dances, though I have not performed them in many years. Young mother after young mother stepped forward, sharing fragments of half-remembered lore, pieces of songs, steps from ancient dances. As they spoke, sharing their memories, something magical began to happen. The memories started to connect, to form a complete picture of the old ways. Amara planted the seed in the center of the village, and the entire community gathered around it. They sang the rain songs, with voices rusty from disuse but strong with conviction. They danced the earth dances, with steps clumsy from neglect but hearts full of hope. And as they sang and danced, as they remembered who they were and where they came from, the seed began to grow. It sprouted into a sapling overnight. By the next evening, it was a young tree. And on the third day, as the whole village sat in its shade sharing stories they had almost forgotten, the clouds began to gather. The rain, when it came, was gentle at first, a soft pattering that made the children laugh and the adults cry with relief. But then it grew stronger, washing the dust from the air, filling the wells, bringing life back to the fields. For 7 days and 7 nights it rained, and when it stopped, Kimani was green and alive again. Months passed, and the village prospered as it had not for years. The tree that had grown from the magical seed became the new meeting place, its branches providing shade and its fruit feeding any who were hungry. But more importantly, it stood as a reminder of what the people had learned. They no longer took their connection to the land for granted. The rain songs became part of their regular ceremonies. The earth dances were taught to every child. The stories that bound them together were shared every evening as families gathered for their meals. Amara became known as the Rainbringer, but she always corrected anyone who used that title. I am not the Rainbringer, she would say. We all are. I simply helped us remember. She married a young man named Genzi, a hunter whose courage matched her own, and together they had 3 daughters. To each daughter, she passed down her grandmother's amulet for a time, teaching them that true power comes not from magic objects, but from understanding one's connection to community and land. The youngest daughter, Asha, was particularly gifted at hearing the whispers of the earth and the songs of the wind. When she was 16, a terrible drought struck a neighboring village, and their elders came to Kimani begging for help. Go, Amara told her daughter, pressing the amulet into her hands. But remember, you are not going to save them with magic. You are going to help them remember how to save themselves. And so the cycle continued, as it had for generations, as it would for generations to come. Years later, when Amara was an old woman with silver in her hair and wisdom in her eyes, children would gather around her under the great tree and beg for the story of her journey to the Whispering Baobab. Tell us about the guardians, they would say. Tell us about the trials. Tell us about the magic. And Amara would smile and begin the tale, but she always ended it the same way. The greatest magic in the world is not the power to change your circumstances. It is the power to remember who you are, to understand your place in the great web of life, and to act with love for your community. This magic lives in all of us, waiting to be remembered. Many generations passed, and the story of Amara the Rainbringer became legend. The great tree at the center of Kimani grew even larger, its branches sheltering not just the village but travelers from far and wide who came to hear the wisdom of its people. The village prospered, but more importantly, it remained connected, to the land, to the ancestors, to each other. When difficulties arose, as they always do, the people did not wait for a hero to save them. They remembered the lessons of the Rainbringer, that the power to overcome any challenge lies not in individual strength, but in community wisdom, not in magic from outside, but in remembering the magic that already exists within. And sometimes, on very quiet nights when the wind whispers through the leaves of the great tree, those with the gift of listening can hear voices. The voices of all the Rainbringers who came before and all who will come after, reminding the world that the greatest adventures are not journeys to distant places, but journeys into the depths of our own hearts, where we discover that we already possess everything we need to create the world we dream of. The story of Amara teaches us that true heroism is not about individual glory, but about helping others remember their own power. It reminds us that the most important magic is the magic of connection, community, and compassion. And it shows us that the greatest treasures are not gold or jewels, but the wisdom, stories, and traditions that bind us together across generations. In the end, we are all Rainbringers, capable of bringing life to barren places, hope to desperate situations, and healing to broken communities. We need only remember who we are. Thanks for watching. Kindly like and subscribe.